She didn't shout. She didn't break a sweat. Jasmine Crockett calmly dismantled Trump's talking points on live TV and left the room speechless. It was already the most watched debate of the year, not because anyone expected real policy to break through the noise, but because people knew something unpredictable might happen. That's how these nights work now. A spectacle, a performance, and somewhere in that swirl of lights, rehearsed applause lines, and carefully moderated chaos sat Jasmine Crockett, quiet, still watching. She'd been underestimated before, written off as too new, too bold, or just too much. But tonight, she wasn't here for validation. She wasn't here for clips or zingers. She had something to say, and she'd been waiting. Across from her stood Donald Trump, still commanding a loyal base, still speaking, in sweeping statements that made headlines before the fact-checkers could even catch their breath. And tonight, he was informed. The truth is, folks, Trump said, pacing slightly, hands carving the air, like he was conducting a symphony of certainty. We gotta go tougher, way tougher. China's been eating our lunch. These tariffs, they're how we take back control. We bring jobs home. We stop the bleeding. No more free rides. He said it with that familiar smirk, like it was obvious, like anyone who disagreed just didn't get it. Jasmine's eyes didn't flinch. She glanced down once at her notepad, just once, but the rest of the time, she kept her eyes forward, listening, calculating. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room yet, but she was about to be the most important on screen. The camera cut to her as Trump continued. I don't care what the so-called experts say. Tariffs protect Americans, period. You think the people in Toledo or Bakersfield care about global trade balances? No, they care about jobs. A few scattered claps from the crowd. He paused, soaking it in. But then that silence, not the kind that felt respectful. This was different. Heavy. Waiting. The moderator tried to shift to the next topic. Something about infrastructure. But Jasmine leaned in. Not rushed, not interrupting, just precise. With all due respect, she said, Mike, picking up her voice with perfect clarity. I've got to respond to that. The moderator hesitated. You could hear it, just a split-second pause. But, go ahead, Congresswoman Crockett. She didn't raise her voice, didn't posture. Her tone was clean, clipped, like someone tired of playing pretend. Mr. Trump, she said, turning toward him, you say tariffs protect Americans. But which Americans are you talking about? Trump tilted his head, slightly, eyebrow raised. Because in my district, she continued, we got families spending $20 more every week. At the grocery store, we got a furniture plant in Greenville, Texas, that laid off 32 workers last month. Their CEO told me straight, raw materials are costing more because of your last round of tariffs. And now you want to double down. The room shifted, not visually, but you could feel it in the stillness. Like someone finally poked a hole in the polished script. Trump opened his mouth, probably ready with a comeback, but she kept going. And let me tell you about Miss Bernice Ray, she said. 74 years old, diabetic, lives off a monthly check. She came to my office last week, Mr. Trump, and she was in tears. Her insulin is now 60% more expensive because one of the key components is imported, and your trade games have made it harder to get. So no, she doesn't feel protected. She didn't look at the camera. She looked at him. Trump's expression didn't change right away, but the pause in his body language was noticeable, like he hadn't expected her to come with specifics. She didn't wait for permission to keep going. It's easy to talk about jobs from a stage. It's harder to listen to people who don't have one anymore because your policies made it impossible to stay open. There was again that silence, not because they didn't care, but because something real was cutting through. But Crockett wasn't finished. Not yet. Trump blinked once, maybe twice. But the man who prided himself on speed, on controlling the moment, suddenly seemed just half a beat behind. He reached for the mic with a practiced hand, brushing off the weight of Crockett's words. With a short chuckle, "Look, I get it," he said. "I really do. She's emotional. She's passionate. That's great. But we've got to think bigger than one factory or one story." That was it. Crockett turned slightly toward the crowd, jaw set but voice steady. "This isn't about one story. This is about patterns, about lives being turned inside out by decisions made in rooms like this, by people who will never have to sit with someone like Miss Ray and explain why insulin now costs more than her rent." Somewhere in the audience, someone let out a low hum, not loud, but real. Trump tried again, pivoting. "We can't let China walk all over us. Everybody knows that. We've been getting scammed for years. The American worker deserves better, and that means standing up strong, even if it stings a little in the short term." Crockett leaned back slightly in her chair. She didn't interrupt. She waited. When he finished, she brought the mic up again. "You keep saying short term," she said, her voice a notch softer. "But short for who? People in positions like yours, or people like that single mom in Longview who told me she's been cutting her daughter's asthma medication in half just to stretch it across the month." That hit. Even the moderator looked up. "This isn't theory," she continued. "It's not a headline or a soundbite. These are people who are already holding their breath. They don't have a cushion. They don't have a backup plan. Every decision made up here, they're the ones who pay for it." Trump shifted his weight, and for the first time, he didn't jump to respond. She took the opening. "You mentioned Bakersfield earlier," she said. "I've talked to workers out there, too. You know what they told me? That the tariffs didn't bring their jobs back. Their factories are still closed, but now their groceries are more expensive, and their rent's gone up." Trump frowned. "Well, that's California. That's not. No, that's America." She shot back firm. "Just because it's inconvenient doesn't make it less true." He tried to smile, that familiar smirk again, but it didn't quite land. Not this time. "You know, you've made a career talking over people," she added, now facing him squarely. "But I'm not one of your rallies. I'm not here to play into your rhythm. I came here to speak for people who can't afford to show up in this room." She paused, just long enough for the words to land. The room shifted again. This time it was unmistakable. No one clapped. Not yet. It wasn't that kind of moment, but the tension had changed. Her tone wasn't theatrical. It was cutting and measured, like someone threading a needle, while the whole room held its breath. The moderator jumped in, sensing the shift but not wanting to lose control. "Let's keep the discussion civil." "It is civil," Crockett replied. "It's just uncomfortable. And sometimes that's exactly what it needs to be." No one argued. Trump glanced at the moderator, then back at her. He was searching for something, maybe a line to reclaim the moment, maybe a way to make her look small. But it wasn't working, because she hadn't just challenged him. She had cornered him, with facts, with stories, with calm precision. But Trump wasn't going to walk away quietly. Not yet. Trump leaned toward the mic again, this time with a slight scoff. "You know, I've dealt with a lot of people who like to talk tough," he said, drawing out the words like he was winding up. "But the reality is, if we kept doing things your way, China would own us by now. You talk about insulin and groceries, but that's not tariffs. That's mismanagement. That's inflation. That's bad leadership." Jasmine didn't flinch. She tilted her head just slightly, her expression unreadable, but you could almost feel the fire building behind her eyes. And then, without looking at anyone else, she spoke. "You keep saying the word reality," she said, "but the reality I live in doesn't have boardrooms or golf resorts. The people I represent work double shifts, then go home and help their kids with homework, buy a flashlight, because the lights got cut off." There was a hush again, not the type that's polite, the type that's earned. "You say it's inflation," she continued, "but inflation didn't start this. A broken system did. And your tariffs, they were just lighter fluid on the fire. It's not just about China. It's about choices, the ones made without understanding what it means to live paycheck to paycheck. Trump shook his head. That's just not true. Tariffs are one of the strongest tools we have. Reagan used them. Eisenhower used them. You're acting like protecting American businesses is some kind of crime. Jasmine blinked slowly. You want to talk about protecting American businesses? She asked. Then come with me to Brownwood. A small company that made custom kitchen cabinets had to shut down because their lumber costs tripled. They weren't scamming anyone. They weren't outsourcing. They just couldn't keep up. Those were American jobs. American workers. Gone. Trump opened his mouth, but she kept going. And you know what the owner told me? He said, I voted for him twice, and I still lost everything. That man wasn't a Democrat. He wasn't some liberal talking point. He believed you. And now he's selling tools online just to pay the mortgage. You could feel the emotional shift in the room. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was personal. Trump glanced toward the moderator again, but Jasmine spoke first. Mr. Trump, you say I'm being emotional. She said, eyes locked on his. But that's because I care. I care enough to listen, to ask, to show up. You don't have to agree with me, but don't dismiss me, because I bring more than applause lines. The moderator looked ready to step in again, but instead glanced at the audience, clearly unsure if interrupting this moment would be a mistake. And then, just when the tension seemed to hit its peak, Crockett leaned slightly closer to her mic and dropped it. You're protecting profits, not people, and families in my district can't eat political slogans. The impact was instant. A few gasps, a handful of claps, then louder applause, then a standing reaction from a corner of the crowd that hadn't made a sound all night. Trump's mouth tightened. You could see it, just the smallest twitch. Not rage, not even irritation. Just that flicker of knowing he'd been publicly outplayed. He chuckled again, but it felt forced this time. Very dramatic, he said, trying to spin it. Very TV-friendly. Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't have to. The room was doing it for her. The moderator cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain some structure. Let's move on to the next topic. But even as the debate pressed forward, the energy had changed. Journalists in the press pit were typing like mad. Producers were whispering to each other behind the stage. And in living rooms across the country, people were replaying what they just heard. But this wasn't just a win in the room. The real eruption was coming next, online, by the time the debate ended. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just trending. She was everywhere. A clip of her line, "Families in my district can't eat political slogans," was already pinned at the top of multiple news sites. Someone had added subtitles in real time. Another had cut together a split-screen video. Her calm delivery on one side, Trump blinking and fiddling with his cufflinks. On the other, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even LinkedIn wasn't on it. The hashtag Crockett Clapback had crossed 1 million mentions before the moderators even thanked the audience. And the meme accounts, they weren't sleeping. One already had a photo of her with straight facts, no filter, stamped across the bottom. But behind the scenes, things were a little less flashy. In the staff room, tucked behind the green room hallway, Crockett's team huddled around a muted monitor. Her chief of staff, Ramona Fells, was scrolling through their internal feed. She hit harder than we expected. One aide whispered. Ramona smirked. She didn't hit. She landed. Meanwhile, Jasmine was still backstage. She'd peeled off her blazer and was sipping on a cup of cold water, sitting quietly, while makeup dabbed at her cheek. She wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I said what needed to be said, she muttered to Ramona when she finally joined her. It's just, I don't know if it matters. We've seen people speak up before. Doesn't always change anything. Ramona crouched beside her. Jazz, you can just speak up You made it real. You said what half the country has been screaming at their TV for years. And you said it in a room where people finally had to hear it. Jasmine nodded, but her eyes stayed on the monitor, where the moderators were doing post-debate wrap-ups. Then the unexpected happened. One of the conservative panelists, Derek Slade, a former advisor turned pundit known for towing the party line, leaned into his mic on the post-show panel. "I'll be honest," he said. "I didn't expect much from Crockett tonight, but she had command. That wasn't a gimmick. She came with facts, stories, and she controlled the room." Trump looked flat-footed. "That doesn't happen often." Another panelist agreed. "She connected in a way we haven't seen in years. She was calm, she was sharp, and she wasn't afraid to call it like she sees it. That moment with the cabinet maker in Brownwood, that's going to replay all week." Ramona turned to Jasmine. "You're watching this, right?" Jasmine gave a half-smile, still unsure how to feel. "I just want people to pay attention," she said softly. "Not to me, but to them. The ones I talked about. Outside the building." Reporters were already forming a circle. They weren't shouting for Trump. They were waiting for her. And for once, they weren't asking what she thought of his comments. They were asking what he thought of hers. Back in Texas, people were watching from diners, phones, late-night shipbreak rooms. People who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett before tonight were now texting her name in group chats. A gas station clerk in Waco played the clip for his co-worker on YouTube. A night nurse in Shreveport pulled it up on her phone while waiting for a ride home. Even a retired steel worker in Mobile, who hadn't voted in the last 2 elections, sat forward in his recliner and muttered, "Well, she's got some fire." And that was the difference. This wasn't just about the debate anymore. It wasn't about policies or poll numbers. Something had shifted. People were seeing her as more than a congresswoman. She was a mirror, a voice, a reminder that someone in that room still knew how much a gallon of milk costs. But Crockett wasn't ready to ride the wave just yet. She had something bigger in mind. Morning news opened with her name in the headline, not buried in the middle, not as a rising voice or surprising moment. Front and center. Crockett confronts Trump and wins a room. Local outlets in Dallas, San Antonio, and Jackson all ran pieces on her performance. But it was the calls to radio stations that revealed the real impact. "This Lady Crockett, I didn't know her," said one caller from Texarkana on KBOI's morning show. "But she said exactly what I've been yelling at my TV for years. These politicians act like they know what it's like to choose between gas and medicine. She actually knows." You could hear it. Another caller from Baton Rouge put it simpler. She made Trump sound like an echo. Even those who didn't agree with her politics had to admit she came prepared. Span reran the debate 3 times in less than 24 hours. Each time, the segment with her remarks ran on a split screen while callers shared their reactions. One veteran from Biloxi said, "Her story about the retired cabinet maker hit harder than anything I've heard in a debate since I was a kid." In Crockett's own district, phones in her office didn't stop ringing. Ramona fielded calls from mayors, advocacy groups, and even 2 small business associations that usually kept their distance. A bakery owner in Tyler wanted to send over a thank you box. A grandmother who ran a daycare in Nacogdoches left a voicemail just to say, "I saw you and I believe you." At a small middle school in Marshall, a 7th grade civics teacher paused his lesson plan to show his students the clip. Afterward, one of the students raised her hand and asked, "Can someone like that become president?" The teacher didn't have to answer. Half the room had already nodded. Meanwhile, Crockett remained calm. No tweet storms. No press junkets. She didn't post a selfie or bask in the trending tag. She just showed up to her office the next day and got to work. Sat down with a high school counselor who'd driven in from Palestine to talk about mental health programs. Took notes like always. Asked questions like always. But when she walked through the grocery store later that evening, something had changed. A woman near the bread aisle stopped her. She was holding a toddler on her hip and had one grocery bag in the other. "Excuse me," she said. "I just want to say thank you for not letting him talk over you. for speaking the truth. Jasmine smiled. Thank you for listening. The woman laughed, tired but sincere. Oh, I didn't just listen. I recorded it, sent it to my mama, my cousins, my boss, even my neighbor, and she loved that man. But after watching that clip, she said you made her think. That was it. That was what Crockett had wanted all along. Not applause, not airtime, just a chance to make people think, maybe even make them feel. Because truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's steady, relentless, wrapped in names and towns and broken routines that no one on a debate stage usually bothers to mention. Later that night, a short segment aired on a local station in El Paso. A political analyst was asked what Crockett's moment meant in the larger scheme of things. His answer: sometimes debates give us a soundbite, but every once in a while, they give us a shift. This was one of those. But even as the headlines started to fade, Crockett's message wasn't meant to last just one night. She had a bigger fight ahead. 3 days later, Jasmine Crockett was back in her district, standing under a gray sky in the middle of an open-air market in Corsicana. No podium, no entourage, just her and a few volunteers, handing out flyers for a local food drive. A woman approached her, wearing a faded Cowboys hoodie, and asked, "You the one from TV?" Jasmine smiled. "Sometimes." The woman laughed. "Well, you sure said a mouthful. My brother don't agree with you on much. But he said at least you didn't lie to our face. That's got to count for something." It did. It always did. Jasmine stayed at the booth for another hour, chatting, listening. A man told her he hadn't voted in 6 years, but after watching her, he might register again. A retired nurse shared her story about losing retirement savings after her husband's plant closed due to overseas outsourcing. And 2 teenagers came up just to say they'd use her line in a debate at school. "Can't eat slogans," one of them said, grinning. "Mic drop." Afterward, Jasmine got back in her car, took a breath, and pulled out her phone. There were texts from old college friends, mentions from journalists, even a message from a former Republican representative who wrote, "Didn't think I'd say this, but you were the only grown-up on that stage." She put the phone down and stared out the window. This wasn't about becoming famous. She'd been in rooms where nothing changed. She'd spoken on record 100 times with no audience. The only difference now was that more people were finally paying attention. That night, her team met at the office. No pizza, no celebration, just strategy. Ramona had printed out transcripts of the debate and laid them on the table. "People want to know what's next," she said. "They think you've started something." Jasmine leaned forward. "We're not starting anything. We're continuing what's been ignored. These stories have always been here. We just need to keep the pressure on." Someone asked if she planned to announce anything big, a national run, a movement, something splashy. She shook her head. "I'm not doing this for show. We don't need a banner. We need action. Real wins. Let's go district by district, state by state. Get more folks telling the truth, not just making noise." Across the country, community organizers began quoting her in forums and town halls. Local leaders pulled clips from the debate to open public discussions. Even on college campuses, places where political fatigue ran deep, students played her exchange as an example of what representation could sound like. But more than anything, she gave people permission to feel heard, not just to vote, or donate, or cheer, but to speak, to challenge, to demand more from the people in power. 1 week later, she stood on the steps of a community center in Waco, speaking to a small crowd about proposed housing legislation. A man in his 60s came up afterward, wearing a mechanic's uniform. He didn't ask for a picture. He didn't even introduce himself. He just said, "Keep fighting. You make it feel like maybe someone actually sees us." That was the whole point. Crockett never claimed to have all the answers, but she had something just as rare: the courage to speak clearly in a room where most speak carefully. She didn't raise her voice to compete. She raised it to be understood. And somewhere in 100 towns like hers, people were listening, not because she shouted the loudest, but because she told the truth. The plainest truth doesn't always trend. But when it does, it's our job to do something with it. If you're watching this and wondering whether your voice matters, remember Jasmine Crockett. Speak up, stay sharp, and hold the mic when it counts. Weeks passed, and the media moved on, as it always does. A new scandal hit the news cycle. Another candidate said something outrageous. Talk shows booked new guests. But in neighborhoods across Texas, Jasmine Crockett's words were still making their way into dinner table conversations, PTA meetings, and break room chats. In Odessa, a young mother stood up at a school board meeting and referenced Jasmine's debate moment. She didn't quote it word for word. She didn't have to. What she said was this: "I'm tired of slogans. We need results." The room fell quiet, and then the conversation shifted. Because once someone hears the truth said out loud, it's hard to go back to pretending. In Amarillo, a church pastor worked her story into Sunday sermon. "We're taught to be peacemakers," he said. But peacemaking doesn't mean silence. Sometimes it means having the courage to stand in front of power and say, "You're hurting people." And in a community college class in El Paso, a political science professor paused his lecture to ask his students what leadership looked like. One of the quietest students in the back, Miguel, a welding major, raised his hand and said, "It looks like someone who doesn't flinch when they're surrounded by power." That was Crockett's lasting imprint. She didn't change the whole system in a single night. She didn't promise to, but she lit a fuse. And once people saw what it looked like when someone refused to flinch, they started paying attention, not just to her, but to themselves. Inside Crockett's office, things didn't slow down. If anything, they picked up. Constituents were coming in not just with complaints, but with ideas. One man brought a binder full of local business policy suggestions. A group of high school students came in with a campaign to push for free lunch across every school in their county. Ramona started joking that they needed a second office just for community outreach. Jasmine didn't joke. She leaned into it. She started showing up at community events she hadn't been to before, not to shake hands or pose for photos, just to listen. Sometimes she'd sit in the back of the room and take notes while someone else spoke. Other times she'd step up when a speaker didn't show, filling in to keep the meeting going. Everywhere she went, someone would whisper, "That's her. That's the one from the debate." She never corrected them, but she always reminded them, it's not about that night. It's about what comes next. That became her unofficial motto. Her staff printed it on the wall of the meeting room, right next to a corkboard full of pinned letters from voters, handwritten notes, folded paper with coffee stains, scribbles from kids. One letter, taped right in the center, read simply, "I didn't think people in Congress even remember we existed. You made me think again." She read that one every morning before meetings. One afternoon, a reporter asked her during a walk-in talk, "Do you think you'll run for president?" She smiled but didn't slow down. "I think I'll keep showing up. That's enough for now. But people are saying you've got momentum. You hit a nerve." She looked over. Good. That means the nerve was real. Then she turned the corner and kept walking. Because Crockett understood something many don't. Viral moments fade. But what you do after they fade, that's what matters. It wasn't the camera that made her powerful. It was a silence. She filled the silence that had existed for too long in rooms where people talked past real problems. She didn't fill that silence with platitudes. She filled it with people's names, towns, and stories. And the mic, it was never about holding it for herself. She was holding it just long enough to hand it off to the next voice brave enough to speak clearly, even when the room doesn't want to listen. Now it's your turn. Speak truth. Ask hard questions. Keep the mic on.